This is all about bird flight, the physics of flight, and the straight facts about it. Because, well, you'll see. I don't want to spoil it. We have to start here. We have to say hello to Sir Isaac Newton because he plays heavily into this. Newton's first two laws of motion, of mechanics, govern bird flight and also aircraft flight very heavily. And those first two of his three laws are: a body remains in motion or rest at a constant speed in a straight line unless acted upon by a force. And the second one is when a body is acted upon by a force, the time rate of change of its momentum equals the force. And that relates to directly to three and indirectly to all four of the following things, which these are the four elements of physics that are required for flight. The first is lift, which directly comes from Newton's laws. The second is weight, which indirectly comes from it. And then something called drag and thrust, which also come from Newton's laws. So all four of these things are required for flight and govern flight in one way or another. So to go through these one at a time, lift. For a bird to go into the air, the lift must be stronger than the force of gravity. Lift happens at the wings as air passes over them. And the air actually moves over the top of the wings faster than it moves across the bottoms. And that's what provides the lift. The faster air over the tops of the wings decreases the air pressure on the tops of the wings. And the air pressure gets higher on the bottoms of the wings, and that is what actually creates the lift, if that makes sense. Anybody have a question about that? So it comes down to, well, we'll go on, you'll see. Second, weight. The weight of a bird determines how much lift and thrust it takes to get off the ground. The heavier the bird, the more lift and thrust are needed to get into and stay in the air. This also affects how fast the bird can fly. So the heavier a bird is, the more lift and thrust are required, and the slower it's actually going to be able to go. The lighter a bird is, the faster it will be able to go, and the less lift and thrust, which we will discuss, are needed for it to get and stay into the air. So the weight is an indirect factor related to Newton's laws, but it is a part of it. And again, the same thing is true for aircraft. Same thing applies. Now, the third thing is drag. And drag is what happens as a bird's body naturally resists moving through the air. The shape of the bird, actually, the more aerodynamic it is, the more it helps reduce drag. Drag is just something that's naturally there. And the more of an aerodynamic shape a bird has, the more that helps it to fly faster and to stay in the air more easily. And to put drag into perspective, a person feels drag as they ride a bicycle into the wind. You can feel that. Or as you try to paddle a kayak or a canoe upstream. That force that tends to not want to make things easy for you, that's drag. So then the fourth thing is thrust. And thrust comes from a bird's muscle strength in flapping its wings. It must be a stronger force than the drag, and actually the gravity also, for the bird to get into the air and stay. So it's got to overcome with its thrust in order to get the required lift. It must overcome the pull of gravity and whatever drag it's experiencing. So if you look at this duck here, and you see from head on the shape of its body, not so aerodynamic. And luckily it's got those larger wings because it needs the strength, the muscle strength that's in those wings to get it up in the air. And they have to work a little harder getting up in the air from off the water as opposed to off of land or launching themselves off of a tree branch. Any questions on those four principles before we go on? Because that's going to play all through this. Okay, good. Now, by comparison, and this hopefully clears things or clarifies, an airplane gets lift and thrust from its engines and or propellers if it's a propeller plane. Lift is also aided by the wing size and shape. To take off, an airplane's thrust must overcome its weight, just like a bird, and its fuselage shape aids in the thrust. And then the wing and fuselage shape are designed to greatly reduce drag. And what you're looking at here actually is a official Air Force photo or government photo of a B-1 bomber, which is supposedly the most aerodynamically perfect airplane ever created. And these things are capable of flying 4 or 5 times faster than what an airliner does. And a lot of that has to do with the design shape. And you can see there, it's got a great amount of wing surface area nearest to the fuselage, and the engines are actually built into that. Up. I did not want that to happen. So wing shapes and surface areas suit different purposes and flying styles. So if you look at the top, this gliding size and shape fits birds like seagulls, egrets, herons. This soaring shape, which is broader, but shorter than the gliding, fits animals like hawks, eagles, and vultures. And in birds that are able to do a rapid takeoff, you can see that's a significantly shorter and different shaped wing, though it is still broad for the bird's size. And that's, for example, blue jays, mourning doves, and ducks. And it's more of a V-shaped wing, actually. And then birds that can fly at higher speeds have this longer but narrower shape to their wings. Birds like peregrine falcons, tree swallows, and different species of swifts. And then at the bottom there, these small, very pointed, narrow wings, which are hovering birds, which mainly is hummingbirds, though not always. You have a little crossover there because birds like ospreys are soaring birds technically, but they do have the ability to hover. So birds like herons, egrets, cormorants, they fly fairly high in the air. And if you've watched one in flight, they flap their large wings slowly and continuously. Their flight path is largely straight and even in height. And they glide in at the approach of their landings. So they are slow, continuous flappers as they go through the sky. And by contrast, soaring birds like eagles, vultures, hawks, and ospreys, they flap their broad wings for travel, occasionally cruise with their wings spread on the air currents. And when searching for prey in flight, they spread their wings out and they cruise on the wind currents, typically in circular patterns. I think probably we see this the most with vultures. That's what we tend to have the most experience with, and then hawks. When prey is spotted, then they dive quickly and swoop in head first. And as they make their final approach at their prey, they have their talons out ahead of their body, like you see in the photo on the right here. And when attacking from a stationary position, up on a utility pole or something like that, they also swoop with their wings spread after they make a few very powerful thrusting flaps. So they kind of change positions as they go in for the kill. Now, many medium to medium small birds fly in a straight line, consistently flapping from object to object. And we see this a lot. Think of a bird going from tree to tree, tree to bird bath, birdhouse to feeder, bush to tree. They spread their wings at the end of their approach to slow their flight. And this is typical of birds that we see every day, such as robins, cardinals, blue jays, mockingbirds, cedar waxed wings, and orioles, along with some others. And in this photo on the right here, this bird is caught just touching down. So its wings are open pretty wide. Now, small birds, a lot of them, not all, but a lot, exhibit what is called a scalloped flight pattern. They make short series of hurried wing flaps with a couple of seconds of rest in between. As they flap, their body propels and slightly rises in the air. And during those couple of second rest periods, their body slightly drops. So it looks as they are moving like this blue line here. Everybody's seen that, right? The reason is so much energy is required for them, for their small size, for them to maintain the actual mechanics of flight. They need frequent, very frequent periodic rests. And this is mostly seen with non-migratory species, birds like sparrows, finches, nuthatches, some warblers. They just could not fly the length of your yard without having to stop for a few seconds. They would exhaust themselves completely. And then birds such as barn owls, common nighthawks, and killdeer, they flutter their wings and quickly change speed and direction during flight, resulting, in random flight patterns. And this is called a moth or butterfly pattern. And also, I didn't put this in the slide, but that also often includes the flight patterns of hummingbirds. So we have now covered the 5 different types of flight patterns. And now we have to ask, why are they all so different? Why do these birds not all fly the same? Well, a fact, all flight, as we saw in the beginning, is bound by the same 4 factors of physics: lift, thrust, weight, and drag. Thank you, Sir Newton. And a counterfact, all birds have different shapes and sizes, and that affects the flight factors. It's a reflection of intended purpose for a specific type of flight, whether it's hunting, whether it's related to the habitat they live in, speed needed in migration, and so on. Every single bird size and shape that we see that are all so different, it doesn't matter their size and shape. They must, one way or another, overcome these 4 factors of physics and able to fly. It's just the bottom line fact of it. And again, the effort a bird must put into flight, as I just said, must meet the requirements of physics, regardless of the shape and surface size of its wings and its body shape, weight, and size. Some must overcome the different physics aspects more than others. All birds are not created equal when it comes to this. So this is, I put this in the form of a triangle, a perfect triangle. At the top, you have the requirements of physics, and they are bounded by, on the left, as I have here, wing surface shape and size, and on the right, body shape, weight, and size. The combination of those two things, must meet those physical requirements for flight. So to look a little deeper here, a larger bird with greater wing surface and stronger muscle mass and a more aerodynamic shape, it uses less energy and exerts less effort to fly. And it is more able to coast, meaning soar or dive, and for longer distances than other birds. And this is an example of some wing shapes here. There's actually a whole, and I didn't go into this level of detail, but there is actually a whole science to the variety of wing shapes that are out there, and what their purpose is. Now, a smaller bird with less wing surface, like we see here on the bottom in this example, less muscle mass, and a more plump or bulbous body shape, it uses more energy and exerts more effort to fly. It's only able to coast for very short distances. And our examples here are the Altamira oriole, black-capped chickadee, ruffed grouse, and boreal owl. And look at the shapes of those wings compared to the examples of the birds up above them, which are, in the terms of the black-headed gull, the black-footed albatross, and the brown pelican, birds that fly considerably higher and are birds that do the slow, consistent, full flapping. And in the killdeer, which also has a longer, narrower wing that is larger than these four on the bottom, but does a more of the butterfly pattern that we just spoke about. Mm-hmm. These birds on the bottom have very short, stout wings. And for the actual size of the wing, their flight feathers are longer. They have flight feathers that nearly go the whole width of the wing for the most part, where the birds up on the top do not. They've got 2 or 3 layers of flight feathers that are various lengths. Any questions on that? Okay, good. Along with what we've discussed so far, different feathers play a role in flight, though some do not. Flight feathers make up the wing surface. That's kind of elementary. The flight feathers are the feathers that are used for thrust and lift and soaring. The tail feathers are there for stability. And the tail feather serves the same function as a rear rudder on a helicopter. It's for stability and helps to maintain maintain the stability of the flight in terms of height. And everybody's seen a helicopter. They have that rudder on the back, and that's what that does. If on a helicopter you did not have a rudder and started the engine, the body of the helicopter would just begin to spin around the propeller shaft very, very fast. It would not be able to sit still. But then these other feathers in the wing, the semi-plume, filoplume, bristle, and downy, those are all just different layers of warmth. They're there for insulation and have no effect on flight whatsoever. They have nothing to do with flight. And something else to think about here, size and shape differences in juveniles and adult birds also affects their ability to fly in each case. And if you think of a bird you've seen at some point that is recently fledged, they can only fly a very short distance, and they have to put a lot of effort into it. This isn't just due to inexperience, but also its small size and small wing surface. A baby hawk, for example, to fly is going to have to go through the same amount of exertion and the same amount of effort to fly as something like an adult grouse, just because of the size of the bird and the size of the wings. And again, what's required to overcome those 4 elements of physics. Now, their bodies and wings grow quickly after fledging, and along with that, so does their flight ability. And you can see in the photo on the right here, some differences in bald eagle tail feathers from immature to adult. Okay, now I have to move this. Here we go. Whoops, I don't want to do that. I wanted to stay there. Sorry about that. Besides how birds fly based on wing shape, the shapes of individual feathers and the overall feather arrays also determine what a bird can do in flight. And when we say overall array, that means the set or the series collectively of the different feathers that make up the flight feathers within the wing. For example, if you look on the lower left, the primary wing feathers of a tree swallow, you've got 4 or 5 of them that are fairly long and narrow, and then the 4 on the right are shorter and broader. But if you look at the American white pelican primary wing feathers up above, you've got 4 that are much well, you've got three that are much narrower, overall as compared to what the tree swallow has. And then it's got a couple of longer ones with four wider ones that are smaller. And then over on the right, sandhill crane, there are secondary and tertial wing feathers. They're almost all the same size, pretty close, and they're all very wide. And if you look at the osprey and the golden eagle primary wing feathers, it's interesting. They are very similar to what the white pelican primary wing feathers are. You have the first four, or in the case of the golden eagle, six that are very narrow feathers out towards the end, and then they're fatter closer to the body or whiter closer to the body. And then you've got a set of 4 or 5 that are shorter and broader. And these are all birds that are, able to fly at higher elevations. We see them at higher elevations, except for the tree swallow. And these other birds in flight do consistent, steady wing flaps. The golden eagle and the osprey have a different shape overall from the others. Their series is different, their array, because they are also birds that are able to soar. And in the case of the osprey, again, they are capable of hovering on winds over the water. And this tree swallow, who looks so different from all the rest of these, that's a bird that its flights are typically pretty low. On average, about the height of a human's head, up to about like maybe 15 feet or so. But they're able to fly very, very fast. Tree swallows fly much faster than these other 4 types of birds that they're grouped with. And it's because they're smaller. They have more muscle mass for their size, and they are much more aerodynamically shaped. The tree swallow has got a body that is much more aerodynamic than any of the other birds on this page, especially when you're looking at something like the American white pelican and the sandhill crane. So hopefully you can see the difference there and how it affects it. So it's not just the shape of the wing, but it's what comprises that shape. And to look a little more at this, here are some different birds. In the upper left, a wild turkey. This is the wing feathers. Ooh. And you've got a wide variety here of shapes and sizes. And this is by far, I think, out of the 6 birds that I have feather arrays pictured for here, the heaviest in weight. Typically, I think a wild turkey is probably heavier than any of the other birds here. Maybe kind of close with a great blue heron, but certainly way heavier than an eastern bluebird or a pheasant or a black vulture. And again, out of all these, and I've put it in the center, the eastern bluebird, the primary wing feathers, you can see it's got a very different shape for each of its feathers in the array than any of the other birds on this page. And again, here you've got a bird that flies from about the height of a human head up to about maybe 15 to 20 feet on average at the most. And they're pretty fast flyers, and they're able to fly more quickly, take off more quickly than any of the other birds on this page. And again, it's because of their size and what comprises that wing. Turkeys, tundra swans are pretty slow to take off from the ground comparatively from other birds. They require a lot more effort. But now tundra swans also are able to do some soaring. And as you see on the left, along with the black vulture, the birds that are able to soar have at least 3 or 4 of these primary feathers that are very, very narrow out on the farther end, and then they are wider in towards the body. You see 3 of those with the tundra swan, and you see 5 of them here actually with the black vulture, which is probably the highest and best soarer what's on this page. And then you look over to the right, you have the great blue heron primary wing feathers. And again, this is a bird, although these are juvenile feathers here. These are the feathers of a bird that is able to do consistent flight at higher elevations, slow, consistent, full flaps. They get a lot of power out of each flap, and it's fairly easy for them to overcome drag and gravity because of the wing shape and the wing space and the feathers array that comprises it. It just makes it easier for them. And then you look at the ring-necked pheasant. This is a little different from all the other ones, the wing feathers here. And this is a bird that not a super high flyer. It certainly does not fly like an eastern bluebird. It does not have weight issues like a tundra swan or a wild turkey would have, but it is within the group of birds that are known for very quick takeoffs. They make a very quick takeoff, just like a duck or a lot of your other waterfowl, like grouse. So they've got feathers that enhance their ability, if you want to say enhance, to make quick takeoffs. And it's not just to make quick takeoffs. In their case, it's also to make quick takeoffs from areas where they do not have a lot of room in which to take off. They're not like a duck on the water that's got thousands of feet of open water in front of it in which to take off from. They're the pheasants are typically in a field, tall grasses, scrub, invasives. So they really have a very, very short distance that they've got to project themselves up into the air. And birds like the grouse are the same way. birds like, well, we got a few, I'm kind of blanking out on it right now. The woodcock, same thing. You know, you see the woodcocks a lot in grassy areas like that or in wetlands, and they need to make a real quick takeoff, and especially when they're going through their breeding thing. And, you know, there they are in the middle of a bunch of reeds or cattails, not a lot of room in which to take off. So they've got to do it quick. They've got to get higher in the air faster. And as such, they have a very different type of feather array from what any of the other birds do that you see on this page. Are there any questions on that? I'm certainly not an expert on this, but this is what I have discovered from doing the studying that I have on this. And it, you know, it goes deeper than this, especially when it comes to the feather makeup. I'm sure everybody has probably seen or witnessed or maybe even done the demonstration in a program at one time or another about how and why owl wings enable them to create silent flight. And it is because of the fact that the outside, if you will, the outside edges of their flight feathers are fringed. Like if you look at the tundra swan here, they're smooth on both sides. But with an owl, particularly the larger owls, the outsides of their flight feathers are fringed, and it allows them to take off from a tree limb or whatever and fly very, very silently. They're able to sneak up on this prey that doesn't even see them coming, because that, in combination with their great eyesight at night, their night vision, and their great sense of hearing, you know, they know where prey is without even seeing it or hearing it, and they can zero in on it, and they catch whatever that prey is completely unawares, because they can flap their wings all they want and their flight is silent. So you have some things like that going on as well. And I will mention at the end here, this does not just apply to birds and aircraft. Anybody take a guess as to what else it applies to?
Insects.
Insects, yes, but I am thinking of something else. Insects are different. I mean, the same principles of flight apply to insects, but an insect wing is, for the most part, all one structure. It's all one surface. It's more like an airplane wing. It's not made up of many parts like a bird wing is made up of many types of feathers. So they're actually closer to aircraft. I'm thinking of something else. Okay, these guys.
Oh, bats.
Bats have to overcome the same 4 principles of flight that
Oh.
birds do, that insects, that aircrafts do. And with bats, their wing shape is something that enables them to do that fluttering flight as well, that butterfly or moth flight. Because if you've ever seen a bat in action, actually, and I think most of us have, they're flying really crazy all over the place, and it's because they, in their radar, their sonar, actually, they are getting all these pings from area insects, and they're trying to go from as fast as they can from one insect to the next, filling themselves up. So their flight is very erratic, and they are able to do that because of their wing shape. And if you look at them, their body actually is pretty aerodynamic. It's a lot more aerodynamic than that of a turkey or that of a swan, or an egret, or some of the other birds I could name. They're pretty aerodynamic little creatures. Okay, so does anybody have any questions on any of that? Or any comments?
So interesting. Absolutely love this.
Well, thank you. And I will stop share at this point. Anybody? Any questions? Any comments? This, I will tell you, actually, and I'm not pushing it, I'm not advertising, but this was something that I had touched on in my nature book that I had published. I had touched on about the scalloped flight of some of the birds, because I wondered why that was. It was something that always interested me, and I did research and discovered why those birds fly that way. And it was just very, very interesting to me. So it ended up in the book, and I just thought to do this program expanding on all of the different types of bird flight we see, because they're not all alike, and what causes that, why. That was the thing. Why do they all fly different?
Well,
Or
I
the
haven't
birds.
read that, but I'm going to be watching the birds now.
Yeah, absolutely. It made me start watching them more. They're also and I never thought about it, that they are all so different in size and shape, but it doesn't matter. Anything that flies has to conform to those 4 principles. It's, physics does not bend. So, these creatures have had to evolve or adapt in ways that suited, their habitat, and their habitat and their diets. Absolutely. You can't be a bird of prey and be a bird that has the scalloped flight pattern. You can't be a bird that migrates long distances and have that scalloped wing flight pattern. You'd never get where you were going, and by the time you did, you'd be too exhausted to even live, probably. So it all fits. It's all like pieces of a puzzle. We've got just like about 3 minutes here, unless if anybody has anything they'd like to like to bring up or any suggestions they would like to make? Anything along those lines?
I want to see pictures of those insects.
Oh, my goodness. I was just looking at some of my pictures while we were talking here, and my friend is trying to get me to do some spider aversion therapy, because as I was saying, I don't really care for spiders, but
Yeah.
I was just looking at some of my spider pictures, and we thought what we had on these lily pads in this lake were fishing spiders, and they were.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's called a six-spotted fishing spider.
Ooh.
And they are some seriously large spiders. And I also found out the female is 2/3 larger than the male. And the females generally consume the males after mating. The
Smart.
ones that get away can mate again of the males, but they usually don't get away. And I have a picture of and I wondered why there were two small spiders and one really big spider. And now I know the smaller spiders were trying to mate with the big female, and there was like this, waving of their legs.
Huh.
I have a series of pictures, and one of them we were watching, and there just seemed to be this scurry of the smaller one attacking the larger one. We didn't know the smaller one was the male. And then all of a sudden we couldn't find the smaller one. Well, I know that she ate him now. And then another smaller male was trying to get near, but he actually got away from her before mating. So anyway, six-spotted fishing spider.
Wow.
Fascinating. So I'll have that to share soon too.
Wow.
I wanted to mention also, and hopefully I'm not premature in this, we may well have a third member joining our little organization here. It came to my attention that there is a exceptional student at Dublin Jerome High School named Olivia Went. And Olivia has won a string of writing awards, and all of her writing is nature writing. She's just won a whole bunch of medals and things for her writing. She is very concerned about the environment. And is very empathetic, thoughtful. It says here, creative, deliberate, and animal loving. She plans on pursuing a career she plans on going to veterinary school after earning an undergraduate degree in biology or pharmacology. And she's most interested in working with birds and exotics. And I managed to get in contact with her. She, besides being a junior in high school, she is also a part of the ODNR Conservation Teen Advisory Council. Contact. And in that group, she's advocating for the environment, participating in conservation trips, learning about Native American culture from tribe members. She's working on a service project for that group. And she just on her own, she writes these pamphlets on Ohio wildlife and just passes them out at school.
Wow.
Just incredibly motivated person. And through the author that wrote the article about her, which was in the the Dublin City Scene magazine. I managed to get in touch with this young lady, and she has shown some interest in working with us within Central Ohio Nature. So we will hopefully sooner than later have her among our ranks here, helping us with upkeep on the website and the Facebook page, and also with putting together presentations and being a presenter. She's got to be a really good presenter, I figure, if she's won all the awards she has, and she speaks as well as she writes, which most people like that write really well, speak well. So we may have a fresh face and somebody to bring a lot more to the table, somebody with new ideas. So we're really looking forward to having her on board here very shortly. So it is 9:03. We're out of time here, unfortunately. Thank you all for joining this week. I appreciate it.
Interesting.
And not quite sure